Welcome to the Talent Lab Solutions EdTech Insight series, everyone. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I'm Mike Lopong, one of the founders of Talent Lab Solutions. For those who are tuning in for the first time, at Talent Labs, our mission is to help companies in the education space solve their problems as they work to unlock the potential of all learners.
I'm Chris Blackett. Today we're joined by a good friend of mine, Sach Siriwardane. You just reminded me earlier that we started at Guild on the same day. And so thanks so much for joining us, Sach. Sach was the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships at Guild in EdTech and Upskilling Unicorn and helped spearhead their partnership with the U.S. Olympics team. Sach, I love your hat. We're really excited to dive into your experiences.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to talk about both my experience at Guild and with Team USA. And thank you all for the work you're doing.
Awesome. So let's get started. I have some familiarity with Guild because of course, he used to work there and because of my time in the upskilling space. But for those who don't know, for our listeners, can you tell me more about Guild's mission and approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Guild's primary focus is really looking at unlocking opportunity for the working adult. So it very much started on the premise that tuition reimbursement and education benefits are prohibitive for many people who want to take advantage of it and leverage education to advance their careers. So a lot of people can't go out of pocket. Paying that upfront cost for education is a barrier. So Rachel, our founder, was really passionate about this issue and decided to kind of found Guild on the premise that if you can create a direct payment mechanism and focus on institutions that are really high quality, built for working adults, flexible, you can really unlock opportunity for the frontline worker who is our primary audience. And from there, we really grown as a business. So while education benefits is kind of our core business, really looking at how can we create targeted skilling, career opportunities, and what are the wraparound supports that we need to really help folks advance. So we work with some of the largest employers in the country, Target, Chipotle, so many others, and recently have had a lot of work in the healthcare space. But that's kind of what Guild's really focused on. So I'm excited about where we've been in the past and where we're going in the future.
I'm excited as well. I think, I've worked a lot in this space and I know how important it is to deeply invest in people and also make sure that that cost isn't put onto them. There's a lot of people struggling and there's a lot of opportunity for people to climb the ladders. Thanks so much for the work you do there. Can you tell me more about your role or what your role was at Guild?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sit right now in the strategic partnerships function. So initially, Guild kind of works with two different sides. So we have our employer partners, like I said, the Targets and the Chipotles of the world. So Guild will work and we will run their education benefit. So the platform, the coaching, and all those fees. And then we also have a number of learning partners as well. So we work with Purdue Global, eCornell, a number of both short form and long form degree providers. So that's kind of historically where our business has been. But as we've grown and evolved, we've started to understand and look at, okay, what other partnerships can we leverage to help expand educational access and further our mission? So the strategic partnerships function was founded with the idea that how do we look at nonprofits, coalitions, other organizations doing great work to kind of partner and really advance both our mission and help them as well? So ultimately, our goal is to serve more learners. As my role in the strategic partnership side has been sort of to figure out who can we look at that has kind of a similar approach to us and where are there synergies where we can kind of advance educational access for folks. So that's the strategic partnerships function.
That's fascinating. That's actually a really good segue, I think, into our next question, which is the purpose that partnerships serve in Guild's business model. I think I had left Guild before some of the partnerships function was set up. And so I'm really interested in, you mentioned some of the synergies, looking at some nonprofits, but yeah, could you tell us more about the purpose and role that some of these partnerships serve in the Guild ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because there's always that, do you build it yourself or do you partner, right? That's kind of a constant struggle I think organizations are working with. And I think for both of you who have been in this space, there's just so many different issues and so many different populations to serve. So I think for us, we want to work with the organizations who are doing great work on the ground. So for example, as we're exploring the nonprofits and coalition space, there are groups who dedicate their whole time to serving refugee and immigrant populations or justice impacted individuals, and they have the access, they have the relationships. So for us, it's okay, where do we really play and where do we do well? If we can kind of enhance what they're already doing, complement, and then leverage our existing partnerships in the employer world to kind of create this ecosystem approach. So I think it's very much in the spirit of competitive advantage. I think for Guild, what we do really well is understanding future hiring needs, understanding the labor market, understanding a lot of that, and being able to administer the benefit and kind of bringing different players to the table. So for us, I think our partnership approach is very much around okay, what do our employers want today? Because at the end of the day, I think really kind of bringing it back to them. And a lot of them want to do the work in this space as well. They want to kind of hire folks who come from marginalized communities, but they don't necessarily know how. So I think for me, our partnerships ethos is about kind of connecting the dots, but then also recognizing where everyone plays and kind of leveraging people's expertise.
It sounds like some of the partnerships helped you move even sort of further in the employee experience to, you mentioned like companies, nonprofits who worked with sort of refugee populations. And so would you then work to get those people into employer pipelines for like hiring?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that's our ultimate goal, right? Because I think where Guild plays today is once you sign on with an employer, you sign a contract, whether it's 90 days, first day, 6 months, you then have access to education. But what we're looking to do is even kind of move that up funnel. So how can folks be aware of Guild? So when they're looking for a job, when they're looking to move into that next place, they know what Guild is. They know that that is an opportunity. So they're being drawn to a company. So that's the employer side. But I think we kind of think about it as that pre-hiring pathway. So making folks both aware that education benefits are a thing. So, it's kind of flipping the model where it's not go to school to get a job, but it's get a job to go to school.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of our recent pushes that we've been doing to help folks be aware of that.
Yeah. That's fascinating because it's sort of Guild, I think, had really done an exceptional job at the employee retention, right? Helping employers retain and upskill. But now it sounds like these partnerships also help with talent attraction. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw some Chipotle ran a campaign back 3 years ago at this point where they targeted some of their high turnover stores and they ran, it was actually called Get a Job to Go to School. And they saw a huge pull for folks once they knew that, I think Chipotle pays for your college degree. It's, one of the quickest paths to the middle class is what they kind of branded it as. And so when you kind of make folks aware of that, it's all about awareness, I think, ultimately. And so it's just a constant thing we're looking to do, both pre-hiring, but then, once someone is at a Guild employer as well.
So I'm really curious then about how this partnership with the Olympics worked and how did it first come about?
Yeah. Um, it's been a long time coming, is what I'll say. So about a year and a half ago, when I had first joined and helped found the team alongside Say Wine Tribe, who you work with, Chris, we were approached with this opportunity by a former Olympian, Megan O'Leary. She had a relationship with someone at Guild, and they were looking for a new vendor for their education benefit. I think a lot of times, when you think about Olympians, you think about the Katie Ledeckis, the Michael Phelps, the folks who have these massive endorsement deals lined up. But the reality of the situation is that is not the case for 95, 99% of Olympic athletes. A lot of them really struggle with transitioning to life after sport. And a lot of them, don't make the salaries. They have to work jobs while they're competing, while they're training. And so it was a really good mission fit for what we're looking to do. And so we were very, very excited about the opportunity. It was just figuring out, okay, how can we make this the most impactful for Team USA Olympians and Paralympians? So once we were approached with it, we really looked at, okay, what had they done historically in terms of their education benefit? And it was, your typical tuition, they called it a tuition grant, but tuition reimbursement type thing through a past partnership. But they were looking to elevate the athlete experience. They were really interested in that coaching element, a lot of the things that make Guild special. And so over the past year, we've partnered with them leading up to Paris about figuring out, okay, how can we make this the best benefit for athletes, particularly as they think about kind of supporting them both on and off the field of play is how they reference it.
That's fascinating. And I love that you brought up how a lot of Olympic athletes have to work, other jobs. I think Michael and I were talking about how even professional athletes, right? A career ending injury and they're working at a car dealership or something.
And then also, I think when you think about this, these might be some of the best learners ever, right? If these people dedicate their lives to these sports, and obviously they are lifelong learners. So I imagine that there's a lot of interest in this partnership and what you're able to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both in terms of just when you think about, these are people who are used to being coached. They are told every single minute, this is what you need. This is when you show up. So they are very eager and hungry for the next thing. And so it's been very excited to see just the level of engagement around this benefit so far. And we're hopeful, especially coming out of Paris with, some of the back to school timing and just with things slowing down a little bit, that we're going to continue to see that as well.
And so, you mentioned how the Olympics, their previous education benefits partner, use tuition reimbursement. And I think when my first job after graduate school was at a company that also had tuition reimbursement where I had to pay upfront for the class. And then once I finished it, they would reimburse me up to a limit. But I'm curious if you could tell us more about why that is such a barrier, and then what is so different about Guild's partnership with the Olympics versus the previous sort of legacy education benefits.
Yeah. So speaking holistically, I think, tuition reimbursement, the average American has $400 in their bank account. So when you think about that upfront cost of a degree, even for some of these, flexible lower cost programs, that is a huge, huge barrier. And beyond that, it's just the ease of the program, right? So it's, you have to pull the paperwork together. You have to make sure you meet the guidelines. There's a lot of policy and administration burden that is placed on the employer or the athlete in this case. And so I think with Guild, it's just making it as easy as possible. We think about the different points of friction on a learner journey, and Guild was really kind of structured to reduce those and remove those as much as possible. So both for Team USA athletes and workers at our employers, I think our goal is really to make that as easy as possible, removing both the financial burden, but also just kind of the administrative burden that exists for someone who's trying to go back to school, since it's a huge endeavor. I mean, I think we all experience that at some point. So that's kind of the way that the model has shifted. And looking at Team USA athletes specifically, I think it was not only the shift from tuition reimbursement to what we call tuition assistance, so where Guild facilitates the direct payment with the institutions, but it's also making sure that what they're taking is relevant to future work aligned pathways. So we worked very closely with Carrie White, who is the vice president of athlete benefit services at Team USA. And we were really focused on, okay, what we looked historically at what athletes were interested in from a learning standpoint. And as you can imagine, a lot in the data and tech space, a lot in the healthcare space, but a huge diversity. And so when we were creating a catalog, it was, okay, how can we kind of take what we know about athletes' interests, but also what employers are looking for and kind of marry those together? So we spent a lot of time curating a catalog, which is also, Chris, as you know, a big part of our design process at Guild, and something we were very, very invested in and worked with Team USA closely on.
And so I'm curious, you mentioned some of the interest areas that they had, like sports medicine. I feel like sports medicine is probably something Olympic app. And so they can take certifications or degrees in sports medicine, health. Could you say more about sort of the range of programs?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest parts about working with this population is they truly are interested in everything. I mean, as you can imagine, Team USA represents, the fabric of the United States. You have athletes who are from, I think, almost every single country when you think about the swath of events they're competing in. And so there's definitely themes. And I think, like you kind of mentioned, a lot of coaching based things have come up for them. So a lot of athletes want to be a career coach, or they want to be a life coach, nutritionist, and that type of thing, because they've had a coach who made a difference in their lives. A lot of stuff in the healthcare space. Like I said, I think they had a PT who got them through a huge injury, or, they have seen the healthcare impact on themselves. So they're interested in pursuing that further. So I think healthcare comes to the top of the list, but then beyond that, it really does touch everything, which has been very, very cool to see. And the catalog we've created for them is, I think, looking across all of our partners, has been one of the most diverse in terms of fields of study and programs.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, please.
Yeah, I think it's just hearing you talk about this is so exciting. It boils down to removing the barriers from learning, right? Make learning as easy as possible. And like when you think about these Olympic athletes who have reached the height of heights, like the stage, like one of the greatest stages on earth, and these people are still thinking about how can I get better in another way, and that is just so inspiring.
Yeah, I think for us, when we think about like Guild's why for this partnership, it really did come to that mission alignment piece, because I think, as we think about the signal that we're sending to every American across the country, Olympic athletes go through the same things that you are going through. They reach the peak of their sport, but they also have to figure out what's next in life for them. And so, gymnasts retire at the age of 24. And a lot of these sports, like, you are being coached and told what to do every single second of your life until you retire. And then there's this huge loss of identity for what's next for me. And so I think the Guild Team USA partnership is trying to meet athletes where they are at a very transitional and hard time for them. And so it's been very cool to see some of the learner testimonials that are coming out of it for what this benefit means for folks who are trying to figure out what's next.
I'm curious. So in education benefits, and Michael, and you worked at Multiverse, Sach, your experiences at Guild, education benefits is sort of a volume game, right? You need to get as many students or employees enrolled. And so I'm curious, there aren't that many Olympic athletes 4 years or every 2 years. And so I'm curious, what are some of the benefits for Guild for this partnership, right? Because it's not necessarily the volume. I assume it's not generating as much revenue as, say, a Chipotle. And so what are some of the benefits for this partnership specifically for Guild?
Yeah. You're definitely right. So the benefit extends to any Olympian and Paralympian who has competed in the games in the last 10 years, which I think is the cool part, because especially as you think about someone who is retired, they probably would use this at a higher rate as someone who's kind of training. It's still very early on, so we're learning how this learner population stacks up against a traditional employer population. But speaking to Guild specifically, I think first and foremost, I think when this was brought to us, it very much, Rachel was excited about it because of the mission alignment. I think she saw this as, this is not something we should do. We have to do because these folks are representing our country. They're putting their careers on hold to represent our nation. So it's something that we need to do to support them. So I think that was kind of why we were interested, took the call and started the conversations. But speaking kind of from a business standpoint, I think we are really excited about the brand aspect of this. I think being able to have Guild's logo alongside some of these massive sponsors. So we are an official education. I'm going to butcher this title. We are an official education, career mobility, and scaling partner of Team USA in the same way that Toyota, Visa, Delta, some of these massive corporations are. So for a small, scrappy startup, that's pretty cool to be alongside there. So that was one of our whys. And then I think also just to that point I was making earlier, our hope is, by showcasing some of these athlete stories about them going back to better themselves through school, through education, that we could access that consumer population. I think Guild, especially with our recent rebrand and some of our work, we're really looking to meet folks before they get to an employer. So it really is helping with our direct-to-consumer push as well. So I would say both brand as well as just kind of some of the mission alignment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing Guild's logo in the announcement in Times Square. So there's definitely that brand halo effect. And then, like you mentioned at the start of this conversation too, some of that sort of top of funnel awareness that prospective employees now have about Guild when they're starting to look for jobs. It does sound like a differentiator.
I remember seeing ads on the subway. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was so awesome.
Yeah.
So that's why we reached back out. I think I was on the subway and saw what is
Guild. Yeah. I mean, Chris can attest to this, but I think Guild's business model historically has been a business to business play, right? Like we work with employer partners, they are a buyer, or who we want to know about this benefit. But if we think about what we're trying to do, it really comes back to the learner, right? So before they go, our vision, our dream is someone, when they go to their job search, the same way you look at, okay, do they have a 401k match? Do they have this insurance, this and this? Our vision is, do they have Guild? Right. So do they have an education benefit through Guild? And so we're really making a push recently to focus on a consumer audience more and more, with the idea, coming back to Chris, what you mentioned is, they know about Guild before they get to employer, and it influences their decision about where to go.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have one more question, Sach, before I hand it over to Michael. Are we allowed to talk about what's coming next for you?
Yes, absolutely.
So you handed in, last week was your last day at Guild. You were off to Oxford in just a few weeks.
No
right?
big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. Whatever. But I'm curious, if you were to look back in 2 or 3 years at your time at Guild, and I think you've left such an impression at the company, but what are some of the signs of success that you'd want to see from the partnership team overall, but also specifically from this partnership?
Yeah, I think my goal is that this isn't kind of a standalone partnership. I think Team USA was one of Guild's very first partners was Disney, which is a very cool place for a startup to start. And as I look at this team and what we've done, Team USA is a crazy place to start, but I don't want it to be kind of a one-hit wonder. So as I think about where we go from here in 2-3 years, I would love to look back and see us working with other sports populations, so thinking about maybe an NFL team, an NBA team, but beyond that, I think still coming back to what the team was founded on and our ethos around that nonprofit coalition aspect too. So I would love to see us kind of pursue partnerships with, employee groups that are supporting refugee and immigrant populations, just impacted individuals, looking at high schools as well. So I think it's just kind of using this as a springboard into other successful partnerships that serve both value for us in terms of just expanding educational access, but also for our employers. Since I think, especially looking at something like the healthcare industry, they really are pushing us, our employer partners, to look at how can we get into high schools and let folks know what a healthcare career looks like. And so I think if I look back in 2 to 3 years and we had say 3 to 5 partnerships, but the breadth of it spans beyond just kind of something with a brand aspect and more of that social impact, I'd feel good about where we.
Yeah. I mean, it is such a great first step into sports too. I mean, we mentioned that, the NFL Players Union covers a lot of benefits for their like NFL players who have a career-ending injury or who leave the field, right? And so that is fascinating and wonderful. It's great.
Kind of zooming out a bit, we have a lot of listeners all across different spaces and industries. And I think they would love to hear your perspective on what makes a good partnership.
Yeah, I think Guild has been very lucky that, as I reflect on, I got the privilege to work on our first healthcare partner and Bon Secours Mercy Health. And as I think about what made that successful, Team USA successful, and some of our others, I think first and foremost is like it's in the definition, right? It truly is a partnership. We always say that we are not a vendor. Obviously, we are offering education as a benefit. We have platform, contracts, all that. But I think a partnership is about recognizing we don't have everything figured out today, but we will work together to solve and figure out how we can kind of build something together. So I think both sides coming to the table and being willing to acknowledge that. Two, I think recognizing that each has different expertise. As I talked about it earlier, when we look at, what role the employer plays, Guild plays, a nonprofit or coalition, Team USA plays, it's making sure that we're leveraging everyone's competitive advantage. So using Team USA as an example, they know their athlete population. They know the struggles they go through. They know them in and out. And so, yes, we have ways that we do things at Guild, but we need to adapt. So how does coaching look different? We ran a coaching session where we kind of brought them in and said, hey, these are some of the challenges that athletes face relative to, a standard employee population. So I would say it's kind of looking at where everyone plays their competitive advantage, leaning on that. And then I think the last thing that I've kind of reflected on as we've seen what has made this successful, it really is making sure that there is value for every stakeholder. So I think a lot of times it's a little bit forced when, there might not be a there for one party, but when everyone really does have kind of value, they really do come to the table as true partners. So making sure to identify, call that out, that's been a huge part of the Team USA partnership in a lot of ours.
Yeah. And I know from my own experience, that battle between, and I don't want to call it battle, it's a challenge between like, okay, this is a partnership, or where you're the vendor, do what I say, we sign a check. Always, and I don't want to say always. Sometimes it's definitely a challenge, but I think what you said around like making sure that everybody understands their competitive advantage, everybody understands their value, and everybody's aligned and agree to those expectations, like really is the answer to that question.
Or even Michael, you're both talking about that sort of relationship between a vendor and a customer. But I think, with partnerships, there's sort of the value alignment that you were talking about, Sach, too, that it sort of benefits everyone, right? Including even the taxpayers who sometimes subsidize some of these education benefits, because it means, education is the best thing we could probably spend on as a society. Like I always thought about that at Guild. And I'm sure, Michael, your time in Multiverse, but these are partnerships that are mutually beneficial for everyone in this value chain. It isn't like, if you increase spend here, it, takes away from, I don't know, it's a higher OpEx for this company or something like that.
Yeah. And I think for us, as we look to future partnerships, it is a huge learning of ours to make sure that, going into the conversations, everyone knows here's the value for X, Y, Z player, because I do think it is a good grounding mechanism for us to kind of come back to when you are in the thick of contracting or figuring out, which program, it helps you zoom out at the macro level to kind of come back and have that North Star that, everyone is doing this for their own reasons, but that doesn't mean that everyone can kind of have value in this ecosystem.
Absolutely. So I worked at Multiverse, another upskilling unicorn. Guild, Multiverse, to a greater degree to you, have had a tough year. The macro environment's been difficult. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. I mean, I think 2 to 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when Chris and I were really in the thick of it at Guild, it was really about that war for talent during COVID and coming out of COVID. So kind of figuring out how to attract and retain employees. And I think as we kind of fast forward with, a tough interest rate environment, discretionary spending has really taken a hit. And sadly, I think while Chris said it best, education is something we should spend on. It's just not the reality of where every organization is. So I think the education upskilling world has taken a little bit of a hit as folks have kind of reevaluated budgets and looked at where they need to be spending today. My hope, my vision is that, we can kind of tie education as a benefit and upskilling opportunities to broader corporate strategy, organizational strategy. So it is kind of moves from that discretionary spending to something companies need to spend on. But I think it is definitely something that organizations across the board, with maybe the exception of healthcare, given just clinical shortages that we've seen at our employer partners.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the interest rate environment because, upskilling and training employees when capital is cheap, like the ROI is still really obvious. I think even now with interest rates being higher, it is still a really good investment, right? I think Guild had a really impressive calculation around why employers should invest in employee education. I think it is still a net positive ROI. But when you have 5% interest rates, it does the it's more challenging, right? Especially I think for HR CHROs to try and argue for more capital to be spent on employee benefits, upskilling, things like that.
Yeah, I think, right. I think, we looked at acquisition costs, retention costs, cost of turnover, cost of training. Those were all part of our kind of calculus for making the case for this. But I think, especially with the introduction of AI, there's been a shift to, how do we think about workforce transformation more so than kind of that attraction retention piece? Not to say
Mhm.
that's still not important, but I think companies are a little bit more forward looking and figuring out, okay, looking at the workforce today, how do we prepare it for these tech adjacent roles, these AI related roles? So I think it's just a different flavor, but the same conversation.
Yeah, it is. It's tough out here. You seem optimistic. So, next question I have is, do you think the outlook for upskilling and reskilling organizations will recover?
Yeah. I mean, I know the Fed was hanging out in Jackson and hopefully some of that's coming down. So hopefully that kind of influences a little bit. But I do think, kind of to what I was just mentioning, that I think it will recover. It will just look very, very different. Like I
Mhm.
said, like I think AI is such a focus for organizations. So it's okay. How do we look at our roles today? So take a call center, a customer service rep, and how do we kind of reskill them into something that is tech adjacent or preps them to sit alongside the technology transformation we're coming. So I do think it will recover. I think organizations who play in this space just have to be very agile to understanding, what are the changes that are incoming. So I think even with Guild, you'll see less focus on war for talent. Education is a benefit, and we look more to, okay, how do we kind of think about the holistic EVP and crew mobility, and how do we think about skilling around AI? So I think even as our organization has evolved, we've kind of changed our tune a little bit to grow to meet where kind of the world is today. So I am hopeful and optimistic and confident that it will recover. I think organizations just have to be adaptable in a way that they historically might not have been.
That's a really good point. I think that the message sort of is the same. It's the positioning for benefits. If companies don't invest in AI upskilling, they will be left in the dust by companies that are training their employees to, you know, collaborate with AI technologies, et cetera.
That
And so I'm curious, Sach, we are coming, I think, towards the end of some of the questions that we had, but one that I'm sure some of our listeners would be interested in is, what advice do you have for some of these organizations or people who are working in higher education, upskilling? And then also, like, do you have advice for them around partnerships as well?
Yeah, I think one thing we've been doing that I think has helped us is it's like customer centered design, right? So Bezos' whole ethos, but Bijal, our CEO, is currently going and talking to every single one of our customers to understand, hey, what are your pain points today? If we built something, what would that look like? And so really kind of starting with the customer and designing around that, because I think, Guild has a lot of really, really smart people who are focused on the future of work. But end of the day, if you don't build it for the person who's using it, what's the point of doing it? So I think I would encourage organizations who are in this space to kind of think about their customer and figure out what their needs are and then build around that.
product
The
management
second,
101.
there you go. There you go. The second thing I'd say is I think what we've really also been doing is kind of throwing out the playbook a little bit. Like these are some pretty crazy times. And so, keeping that kind of single track mind about, this is where we play education as a benefit isn't really serving Guild anymore. So being flexible to meet folks' needs. And so kind of expanding our product portfolio and looking into some of these things like, okay, what would a coaching only offering look like? And being a little bit more open to things that you haven't in the past is something that I think I would encourage. I think on the partnerships front, I think it's finding folks who do what you like don't do well. Because I think ultimately, especially as we come back to a tough macroeconomic environment, as we come back to kind of that interest rate environment, if there are things you can build in house, that's probably the way to do it right now, especially with some of the complexities going on. But if you see other organizations who play in a space that kind of serve a different value chain than you, serve a different stakeholder, working with them is definitely something I'd encourage. So, as we talk about kind of zooming out to that pre-hiring pathway, Guild isn't a talent sourcing company. We don't know every single population. So I think our ethos is, okay, how can we work with these organizations? And then we serve as the conduit between them and the employers. So I think for us, it's very much just identifying folks who play in a space that we don't do well, and then working with them to make sure that we complement each other.
That is the sign of a true partnership. You've dropped so many gems. I'm so excited. I was in this conversation. I'm going to go back and listen 100 times. Everything you said. This was an amazing conversation. To our listeners, if you found this conversation valuable, please like, subscribe, and absolutely share. And join us next time as we continue to explore the cutting edge of education and technology.
Yeah, Sach, it was so wonderful talking to you. Good luck at Oxford. For more information on Talent Lab Solutions and our work in the education workforce development space, you can visit our website at talentlabsolutions.com and follow the Talent Lab Solutions Substack, where we will be dropping some of the gems from this conversation. Thank you for tuning in to the Talent Labs EdTech Insights series.
Thank you both. You guys are doing incredible stuff here and appreciate all of your time and your work.